Why would millions of Iranians in 1979 choose to replace a monarchy with a theocracy? Not uneducated people. Engineers, doctors, university professors, students who had studied in Paris and Boston, women who had been marching for equal rights, communists who had spent years organizing against religious authority. All of them, in the first months of 1979, marching under Ayatollah Khomeini's portrait. All of them, in their own documented words, celebrating. This question has circulated in Western policy analysis for 45 years. The most common answer is the one you already know. The Iranian people are religious, and when given the choice, they chose religion. The documented record suggests something rather more complicated. Picture Azadi Square, Tehran, February 11, 1979. The Azadi Tower, built by the Shah to celebrate 2,500 years of Persian monarchy, rises against a gray winter sky. The crowd estimates run from 3 million to 9 million, and it is not a religious rally. Look at the documented crowd photographs. You see the National Front, Iran's secular nationalist party. You see the Two-Day Party, the Iranian communists, explicitly anti-clerical. You see women, thousands of them without hijab, some carrying signs demanding both the Shah's removal and women's rights. In the same crowd, bearing the same portrait of Khomeini, people who believed profoundly different things about what came next. A woman named Farideh, a composite figure representative of hundreds of thousands of documented cases, had been a student activist at Tehran University since 1976. Leftist, secular, no hijab. She had watched two classmates disappear into SAVAK, the Shah's secret police, for distributing pamphlets. She marched that February not because she wanted an Islamic republic. She marched because she wanted the Shah gone, and because by 1979, the only opposition that had survived long enough to organize that march was organized around Khomeini. The 1979 revolution was not a religious uprising that swept away secular opposition. It was a broad coalition, secular, religious, leftist, Islamist, united by one demand: the Shah's removal. Understanding why Farideh found herself marching under Khomeini's portrait requires understanding something that happened 26 years earlier. It requires understanding why, by 1979, the only organized political infrastructure that had survived was the one operating inside the mosque.
I heard it this morning. Yes, look here, in the paper.
SAVAK, the Shah's secret police, trained initially by the CIA and later with Israeli Mossad assistance, had been systematic. The National Front's leadership? Arrested, exiled, or broken. The Two-Day Party, driven underground, infiltrated, destroyed. Student organizations, monitored and swept. Liberal newspapers, shut. Political parties, banned. The ordinary infrastructure of civil political life, gone, piece by piece, across 2 decades. What SAVAK could not shut down was the mosque. The mosque had its own funding, communicated through Friday prayers, and distributed Khomeini's sermons, recorded in his Paris exile, on cassette tapes that ran through a network entirely outside the formal economy and outside SAVAK's reach. SAVAK could arrest a newspaper editor. It found the cassette tape distribution network considerably harder to manage. So by 1979, when an entire country decided it was done with the Shah, the only organized infrastructure available for a revolution was the one inside the mosque. Not because Iranians chose religion over politics, because politics had been methodically removed and the mosque had survived. But that raises the deeper question: how did SAVAK become so effective? Why did the Shah need a secret police powerful enough to eliminate every secular alternative? For that, you have to go back to 1953, to a prime minister named Mohammad Mossadegh, and to a decision made in London and Washington that the CIA's own documents would spend 60 years not wanting to discuss. What was removed in 1953 was not just a government, it was a possible Iran. The one the millions in Azadi Square had been trying for 26 years to get back. 1951, Tehran. A merchant named Ahmad, representing the hundreds of thousands documented in the historical record, who followed this story with the attention of people who understood it was about them, follows the news from the Majlis the way other people follow football. Because what is happening in the Majlis is, for the first time in memory, actually about him. Mohammad Mossadegh, Prime Minister of Iran. 70 years old, genuinely elected, leading a government doing something Iranian governments had not done in 50 years, governing for Iranians, against the preference of the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company, which had been extracting Iranian oil since the Darcy Concession of 1901. The numbers were not complicated. The Anglo-Iranian Oil Company controlled the Abadan refinery, the largest in the world, the pipelines, the pricing, the accounting. The profit-sharing arrangement gave Iran a percentage that, in 1950, amounted to less than the taxes the British government collected from the AIOC's profits. The Iranian government received less from its own oil than the British Treasury received in taxes from the company that had taken it. A commission of inquiry was formed. Its findings were not published. The Iranians, separately, had done the math. On the 29th of April 1951, the Iranian parliament voted to nationalize the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company. The bazaar closed in solidarity, the specific gesture the Bazari community used when they wanted parliament to know the people were watching.
Our long years of negotiations with foreign companies have yielded no results. With the oil revenues, we could meet our entire budget and combat poverty, disease, and backwardness among our people.
The logic was correct. The British did not dispute the logic. They disputed the consequences, and they had means to address the consequences that had nothing to do with the logic. Britain imposed an embargo, deployed a naval blockade, and withdrew its technical expertise from the refinery. The Iranian economy contracted. Mossadegh went to The Hague, to the United Nations, to the World Court. The World Court ruled in Iran's favor. The British ignored the ruling. The Americans initially tried to mediate. Then they changed their minds. The Eisenhower administration, newly arrived in Washington in January 1953, carried a different calculation than Truman's. Dulles at State, his brother at the CIA, both persuaded that Mossadegh's economic weakness was an opening for Soviet penetration. The internal documents show the analysts understood Mossadegh was a nationalist. The policy decision proceeded regardless. Cold War logic required a client government in Tehran. Mossadegh could not be that. Mossadegh, constitutionally, would not be that. The decision was made. The CIA's own history of the operation, the Battle for Iran, was declassified in 2013. It describes Operation Ajax, the hiring of street mobs to impersonate communist agitators, the bribing of military officers, the coordinated media campaign to portray Mossadegh as a communist. The document notes, in passing, that Mossadegh was in fact a nationalist, not a communist, and that Iran's actual Communist Party had not been part of his governing coalition. The budget for the operation was $60,000. In today's money, roughly a 2-year office lease in Washington. For this investment, the CIA removed a democratically elected government, restored a monarch, and created the conditions for a revolution that would, 26 years later, produce the Iranian hostage crisis, the Iran-Iraq war, the nuclear standoff, and the entire geopolitical architecture of the modern Middle East. The return on investment is difficult to calculate. Mossadegh was arrested, tried for treason, imprisoned, then placed under house arrest in his village. He was not permitted to leave. He was not permitted visitors without government approval. He died there in 1967. He was not given a state funeral. At his trial, the part the CIA's history does not linger on, Mossadegh spoke for hours. He did not deny the nationalization. He defended it as the legal act of a sovereign parliament. He asked the court to explain which law a democratically elected prime minister had broken when he enacted the will of a democratically elected legislature. The court found him guilty of mutiny against the Shah, 3 years in solitary confinement, then house arrest for the remaining 14 years of his life. The trial transcript is in the record. It reads the way transcripts read when one party has already decided the verdict. Ahmad, in his Tehran bazaar, understood within hours, not from intelligence sources, from 30 years of watching Iranian politics. He understood what Mossadegh's removal demonstrated, that a democratic Iranian government challenging foreign economic interests would be removed, and that the foreign power most loudly committed to democracy would participate in its removal. The Shah was restored. SAVAK was established 4 years later, CIA trained, with Israeli Mossad assistance. Its formal mandate was to prevent communist subversion. Its operational mandate was to prevent opposition. Any opposition. Systematic surveillance, political imprisonment, and documented torture, confirmed by Amnesty International's 1976 report. And meanwhile, this is the specific irony the Shah's story carries. The economy was growing. The Shah's White Revolution of 1963 invested oil revenues in land reform, literacy programs, women's suffrage, industrialization. Literacy rose from 35% to 68%. Universities expanded. Iranian students went abroad in unprecedented numbers. The Shah had, in effect, created the population that would overthrow him. He gave them education to understand their situation and retained the secret police to prevent them from doing anything about it. The students who stormed the American embassy in November of 1979 were, on average, 23 years old. Their parents had voted for Mossadegh. They knew exactly what they were chanting when they called the embassy a den of spies. The question is whether anyone in Washington that November understood why. In the winter of 1978, the demonstrations began. Not organized by Khomeini, organized by everyone. The National Front, the students, the bazaar, women's organizations. A coalition united by one thing, the demand that the Shah go. Farideh was in it. Standing next to someone from the mosque she had never spoken to, who also carried a sign in Farsi about the coming Islamic government that she did not, in the noise and exhilaration of millions finally in the street, stop to read carefully. She was not naive. She knew Khomeini had spoken about Islamic governance. She also knew there were no other options with organizational infrastructure left standing. If this changed how you understand Iran, if the revolution makes more sense than it did 20 minutes ago, there's more. This is the Iran Files, 7 episodes tracing the chain from Mossadegh's nationalization to the hostage crisis, the Iran-Iraq war, the nuclear standoff, and everything the headlines don't explain. Subscribe. Each episode picks up where the last one ends, because this is the room behind the door that every Iran headline opens. The Shah left Iran on the 16th of January, 1979. Khomeini flew from Paris on the 1st of February. In the months that followed, the secular parties organized. The National Front revived, new leftist parties formed, new newspapers appeared. For a brief spring of political possibility, the secular majority that had made the revolution seemed to be in a position to shape what came next. The clerical faction moved faster. Khomeini's inner circle had been preparing the constitutional framework throughout the revolutionary period. The concept of velayat-e-faqih, the guardianship of the Islamic jurist, was Khomeini's governing doctrine, though it was not widely understood by his secular partners as the specific structure it implied. The constitution was drafted rapidly, ratified in December of 1979, while the hostage crisis had created an atmosphere in which opposing the new government's direction was equated with siding with the Americans who had given the Shah refuge. Between 1979 and 1983, the documentation is specific. The National Front was suppressed, its leaders imprisoned, exiled, or executed. The Tudeh Party was dissolved by government order in 1983. Mehdi Bazargan, Khomeini's own first prime minister, a secular liberal, resigned in November of 1979 and spent the next decade in a country he had helped build and could not change. Shapur Bakhtiar fled to Paris, where Iranian government agents ended his life in 1991.
Permanent visual argument of the episode, standing above a city whose story is not finished.
The people who made the revolution with Farideh did not disappear. They were removed, again, by a different state apparatus, different methods, different stated reasons, but the pattern was not unrecognizable. A secular generation that had organized and marched and sacrificed found themselves in the early 1980s inside a country doing to them what SAVAK had done, in the name of a government they had marched to create. The speed of that reversal still surprises people when they encounter the documented sequence. In the first months after the Shah's departure, the secular parties were present, publishing newspapers, running candidates, debating the constitutional framework. The window was short. By 1981, the Revolutionary Guards had authority over internal security. By 1983, the Tudeh Party was dissolved by government decree, its leadership arrested. The National Front, whose political lineage ran directly back to Mossadegh, published a letter criticizing the government's direction and was banned within weeks. The mosque had survived SAVAK. The secular parties had not survived the mosque. The question that opened this episode has its answer now. They didn't choose a theocracy. They chose to end the Shah. And by 1979, after 26 years of systematic destruction of every secular alternative, the only organized infrastructure capable of running a revolution operated inside the mosque. That infrastructure belonged to Khomeini. The secular majority borrowed it. And in the political transition that followed, the infrastructure's owner proved to hold rather more durable organizational advantages than the people who had borrowed it. The Shah, watching the demonstrations from his palace window, told Western journalists that his people did not appear to appreciate the enormous progress made under his government. He was correct that they did not appreciate it. The specific reasons were, as the documented record shows, somewhat more substantial than he appeared to realize. The chain that produced the 1979 revolution did not end with the revolution. Every Iran headline since, the hostage crisis, the Iran-Iraq war, the nuclear program, the Green Movement, the Woman Life Freedom protests of 2022, is a link in the same chain. The chain began in 1953, when a democratic government was removed for $60,000 and a calculation about oil profits. And before that, in 1901, when a British businessman named William Knox Darcy negotiated a concession giving him rights to Iranian oil for 60 years. The people who authorized the 1953 coup were not evil people. They had strategic calculations and Cold War frameworks that made the intervention seem rational. The CIA's own analysts noted, in internal documents following the coup, that it had increased anti-American sentiment in Iran, strengthened the very Communist Party it was designed to weaken, and created conditions unlikely to produce long-term stability. They were correct. The stability lasted 26 years. The consequences have lasted considerably longer. Understanding this chain does not resolve it. The Islamic Republic is still governed by the constitutional structure Khomeini's faction designed. The secular alternatives Mossadegh represented have not been restored. The Iranians who marched in 2009, in 2019, in 2022, are still marching for something close to what Mossadegh was building in 1951. They are still being prevented. The Azadi Tower still stands in western Tehran. The Shah built it to celebrate monarchy. The revolution renamed it. It was called Shahyad, built for the Shah. Now it is called Azadi, freedom. The people who renamed it meant what they said. Whether what they got matched what they meant is the question the next 6 episodes will follow. They didn't choose a theocracy. They chose the only door that was left open. The people who closed all the other doors made their decisions in rooms that are now in the public record. You have seen those rooms today.
The chain visible from altitude.
This is how we got here.